Welcome to this week's video, and today we will find out who won in our latest blind test shootout between the Audiolab 9000N and the HiFi Rose RS250A. Who was the winner? Stay tuned to find out. So here we are, this week's video. I know for many of you this is highly anticipated, and for us here as well, because it's been quite intriguing this week's testing, and you'll find out why in a minute as I explain some more. But I guess given how closely these two items are priced, however, bearing in mind what we were talking about in last week's video regarding the Lumen, the Audiolab, it's okay, I'll not be cracking any more Lumen jokes. None of those are still looming on the horizon, and I guess that's the end of the Lumen around for me. However, yes, so based on last week's video where we discussed the potential aspect of the internals of the Audiolab, which we obviously showed you, and yeah, it's been really interesting. I think for many of us, we had this kind of conception of how it might go, but of course, being a fully blind test, there is absolutely zero placebo, and there is no question, I know we've discussed this in other videos too, that placebo or an expectation of performance can actually influence our perception of something. It is very much like the Emperor's New Clothes scenario, and I think I've seen this happen particularly at hi-fi shows where you walk into a room and there's an array of equipment in front of you, and when you start adding it up, it costs more than the average house in the UK, and then straight away we have an expectation this is going to sound incredible, because our mind convinces us that what we're hearing is something extraordinary based on the price tag. And this is where I think this is a good test, because pricing wise, the HiFi Rose slightly undercuts the Audiolab, but if you're going to spend £2,500 on a streamer, does £100 here or there make that much difference? Only you can answer that question, I guess, but it's still a question that's worth asking. And I think for most people, if we are spending up to that level, then that level of price difference wouldn't really be a swaying factor. It does bring us on, however, to the aesthetics, and this is where I feel the HiFi Rose definitely has the edge. There's no doubts that the Audiolab is extremely well built, and when you pick it up, there's some heft there. Heft's a great audiophile word, but it does have some relevance into what we're talking about. And we do often perceive the weight of something with its quality. And I know it's interesting, I've picked up some preamplifiers in the past that cost a lot of money, and almost surprised at the ease of lifting it. But I guess all these things are just part of our human nature as to how we go about establishing what we think demonstrates value for money in terms of build quality and aesthetics. The display on the HiFi Rose is exceptionally good. It's very clear, and I know many people will like the idea of having the album artwork fully visible across the whole screen, which the HiFi Rose does. Or one of the other choices of the VU meters that the HiFi Rose has too, and there's lots of other displays that you can have from the HiFi Rose. That said, the Audiolab has got more of a minimalist design, albeit still with a screen, and really that's all you can say about the differences in the aesthetics. The HiFi Rose isn't a full-size piece of audio equipment, as again you can see from the dimensions. I'll bring those up just now for you to have a look at the comparisons between the two. But ultimately, and as we always say, for me personally, it comes down to the sound quality. So let us, before we get into the actual voting, let me just give you a quick look as to how that all went in the showroom. So let me start by saying this was perhaps closer than it maybe appears in terms of the actual voting. So to add context to that, I'm going to bring the voting up straight away because I think it's important to not preempt something too much without giving you the actual results. So here's the voting that took place in our blind test between the HiFi Rose RS250 and the Audiolab 9000N. So on the face of it, it looks an emphatic win for the Audiolab, and I think it's fair to say that there were some of the tracks that we played where all of us individually found it difficult to pick a clear winner. And I personally feel that on maybe very simplistic tracks, vocals, acoustic, and maybe perhaps some less complex jazz tracks, these two devices would run each other very close. However, and I think this is where the Audiolab really won through, in terms of overall refinement, the Audiolab, to me personally, and I guess to the four, along with myself that chose the Audiolab, was much better at separating things out when everything got congested. There's a track, Willow, that is one of the test tracks we use, and I'll bring up the details of that. You might want to have a listen to it. It's a really good track actually. And the vocal in there on the Rose, now I'll use the word smeary, but it's more a case of it having a kind of a rough edge to it. There's a section in the music, I think it's about a minute and 20 seconds in or so. I'll find the exact timing of it, and again you can have a listen to that part, where on the Audiolab the refinement was there, the vocal was perfect and nuanced, and it sounded great in its own space. And on the HiFi Rose, it just felt a little bit ragged around the edges. That's the way I would describe it. And the separation of all the different instruments, vocals and so on were much more defined with the Audiolab, and even the sound staging on the Audiolab felt just more three-dimensional. Now the thing about this is, it kind of brings up the question that was raised last week about the quality of the contents in the Audiolab itself, because if my, I'll use the term again, reliable source is indeed accurate in what he told me, then there is no doubt that this Audiolab is indeed giving you more for your money than perhaps the price tag would suggest. And that's a good, that's always a good thing. There's no downside to that particular scenario, pardon me, where one device clearly does give you a lot more than the price tag would suggest. What that now really raises the question is, how far can that Audiolab performance be pushed in terms of what else could it outperform? I think there's lots more to this than just what we see in the surface of simply this device beats this device and so on. A lot of us certainly felt that they both offer very different flavours. I think on some tracks the Rose sounded a bit more dynamic and punchy, but ultimately here's the thing, you know, so when you get very used to a sound, and I think this highlights one of the very essential requirements about buying any piece of audio equipment, is you need to spend time with it. We were listening to 3 tracks, roughly a minute and 30 seconds off each track, switching from device A to device B and trying to recall what we just heard from the previous device we'd listened to. And it's, you know, these things become almost like a gut reaction. It's something which you're trusting your instincts, you're trying to remember it at the same time listening to what you're now hearing. And again, I know from over the years that people's recollection of sound often comes with a very large dose of Rose tints to your hearing. And I can think of numerous examples in the past where I recall systems that I heard and went, wow, you know, I'd love to hear that again today. And then I've heard that again today. I thought, oh, okay, it's not as good as I remember it to be. Because since then I've heard so many other things and forget that they actually have now surpassed what I previously thought was good. And I think it's funny, the same thing applies to, I like using cars as an analogy. If you saw last week's video, I used the Volkswagen Phaeton W12 as an example. But this week, I guess it comes back to my early, I would say, foray into driving cars as a sort of a young man. And it was things like Peugeot 309 GTIs, 205 GTI 1.9s, and of that ilk, Escort RS turbos. So my recollection of those at the time was these were great cars, but now I guess jumping back into one of those, I don't think that I would enjoy it as much. Yeah, there would be a nostalgic element to that. But anyway, I digress here. But the point I'm making is that our recall of sound isn't always entirely accurate. So spending time with something, allowing it to bed into your system, is imperative if you want to make a very properly informed choice. And that's something we always encourage very openly. We don't want anybody having something they don't like in their system, and we will always work with an individual to make sure that we've understood what you want properly and that what we're recommending fits in, and then allied to spending some time at home with the device so you can truly try it out. And I think this is very pertinent to the test we've done here. In isolations, I always say this, if you heard the HiFi Rose on its own, you would definitely like it. It's a very easy to like device. And the Audiolab, it just is performing higher. There's no other way to put it. My reservations about the Lumen app that you can use with the Lumen, Audiolab, is actually, when you get used to it, it's not as clunky as maybe I first thought. It's like all these things. It takes time to get to know a bit of software and how it operates. It's maybe less intuitive is the word I would use, but once you've learned it, it does the job. You know, you'll bring up your album artwork, it shows you how much you've played, you can look at your playlist and see what's coming up next and so on. So there are ways that this app, once you learn it, it's as good as anything else out there. But coming back to sound only, I would say quite succinctly, the Audiolab really is a higher level of refinement than the HiFi Rose. But unless you hear it for yourself, how do you conceptualize that from our explanations? I think everybody that voted for the Audiolab all felt the same. Some of our team it was a 3-0 victory on 3 tracks, others it was 2-1 and so on. But those that, there's one comment I picked up from Martin, who's our logistics manager, and he said it was easy. It was, you know, device B, which in his listening test was the Audiolab. He said it won him through every single track, and he was making notes, and on one of the notes on the 2-track comparison on the Willow track that, as I say, I've given you details of, he said that the Rose in comparison sounded a bit muddled and muddy and a bit confused compared to the Audiolab, and I can kind of understand that statement. It really speaks more about the great value for money the Audiolab is versus the Rose, not saying the Rose isn't worth its money, because it clearly is, and we've done other comparisons with the HiFi Rose where it has easily won through against similar priced devices. So this is more a case of, I think, the Audiolab really showing that it has a lot of value in there purely in how it sounds. Now, I'll be honest, I'm kind of meh about the styling of it. I can see why they've styled it that way. It's a requirement because of the branding, and we spoke about branding last week and how different companies have to meet their branding expectations so it all matches through. I personally would like to have seen something perhaps a bit more retro and industrial looking. We've all got different preferences, and probably I would even know where to start with that kind of design, so I'm not criticising anything anybody has done when I myself couldn't even start with it. So aesthetics are always a personal preference, that's for certain. It's still fascinating, the outcome. It does demonstrate we've got a very hotly competitive segment of the streaming market right there, and they're right in the middle of the £2,000 to £3,000 category. There's Ineos comes into play in that particular category, SOTM that we've mentioned before as a pure streaming device, but ultimately we will be driven by reviews, our personal preference in terms of aesthetics. But if you're looking for something genuinely that is going to give you a phenomenal sound for that outlay, quite honestly, the Audiolab is one of the best devices I personally have heard for quite some time at that price. So kudos to Audiolab for bringing this to market. I'm grateful to my reliable source for the information that he provided me as regards the internals. The internal DAC is a 32-bit DAC with the Audiolab, and I suspect that keeping it in the 32-bit domain means that this refinement, not just only that of course, but this is partly why the refinement levels on the Audiolab sound really, really impressive. And I think the more I was to live with the Audiolab, the more I would start to like it. And I think as well, it's probably one of those devices that you can listen to a recording that we know is very compressed and not really listenable to a certain extent. We've all got some music that we like that would fit that criteria. I'm sure you can think of quite a few right now. And I tried a couple of those tracks that previously it would get halfway through and I think, I can't really listen to any more of that. It's hurting my ears, so to speak. So the Audiolab, Freudian slip, the Audiolab really does bring that refinement into areas that maybe we wouldn't necessarily think of as part of our buying decision making, that decision making process where we weigh up the pros and cons and so on. So yeah, it's a very highly recommended device, as is the HiFi Rose, and I know people that own the HiFi Rose that absolutely love it. It could just be a case of what we used it with. We used it with, this week, the Gato DIA 250S NPM, which we decided to use a slightly less expensive amplifier that's more akin to the pricing of the two devices. And it still sounded great. We're using Revival Audio's Atalante 5s, which I have to tell you, if you've never heard a pair of these, they are absolutely amazing. Again, I'll bring up some of the specs. It's not what we're here to do, but you should look up Revival Audio, a relatively new French company, but with a massive, I would say, knowledge base and experience of the guys that are behind it. You've got some of the most, I would say, high-profile designers in the industry that set this company up and are involved in its functionality. Great speakers right across the range. In fact, their Sprint 4 floor standing speakers, which retail about £1,800, was a revelation. But anyway, I'm digressing once again. That's not what we're here for. As always, in all our videos, I have a favour to ask of you, and that is that firstly, I want to thank every one of you that has watched our videos, commented, liked the videos, and subscribed. I genuinely can't thank you enough. As I said before, we're a small family business, and your support is crucial to us as a business. We want to make sure we're providing you with the best advice, the best service, and the best products, and that is our primary function, and we're really passionate about it. We care, and these blind tests, we enjoy doing them, and I hope you enjoy watching them. And if you do, please just subscribe. It takes a few seconds. It means a great deal to us, and it means that, you know, my commitment to you is that by liking our video and subscribing, that we will continue to work hard to bring you the best content that we possibly can. And equally, as I mentioned before, our newsletter, please subscribe. I'll put the details in the description section below the video itself, because there's early bird offers, there's offers that are only available through the newsletter, so please subscribe. Next week, now I know we've put it off and put it off and put it off, but next week we have the results of the complete group shootout, and what's going to be fascinating now after this week is where will the Audiolab fit in to that test. It's intriguing. It is intriguing, and I honestly can't. Again, you know, I'm buzzed about doing these tests because we just don't know where it's going to go. Sometimes we start off, and when we started doing this test, the first two people actually voted for the HiFi Rose, so it was a 2-0 start to the Rose, and ultimately ended up being 5-2 to the Audiolab. And that's, you know, the way it starts off, you think it's going to go one way and it ends up going somewhere else. That's always intriguing and fascinating and stimulating, so we want to keep doing more of these. So we've got the test next week, the results of that, and we actually have a week's break where there won't be any video that week. It's to do with staff holidays and staff time off, so we can't actually fit one in other commitments we have, but we will be back again the following week, and we've got something new and different, and we're going to be talking about other blind tests we can do. But actually, here's something, an invitation. If you are reasonably local to us, why not come in and we'll do some of this blind testing with you and let you hear these devices, A versus B, and see how you vote. And assuming you're happy, we might video you and include you in part of a future test. We are going to do, as we promised, the Volumio streamer only versus the Ever Solo Master Edition as a streamer only into an external DAC, and that will be the video we will have in 2 weeks' time. So you'll get to see the results of that test, and that again is fascinating because it is streamer only, and I know a lot of you are very interested in such a device because you already have a DAC that you want to use, and some of the devices we're talking about, the internal DAC then becomes redundant as part of that process. So tune in for that one. That's a few weeks away. Tune in next week and you will get the hugely anticipated test results of everything together, and you will see precisely who wins, what you're getting for your money, and find out if there is the magic bullet that exists in audio streamers. As always, have a great week listening to music. I'm looking forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you so much for watching, and please take care, and I will see you back very soon.